8 Gentle Truths That Set You Free After 60, a Buddhist journey back to yourself. There comes a moment, quiet and unannounced, when you find yourself sitting alone in the same room you've known for years, yet something feels unfamiliar. The walls haven't moved, the furniture hasn't changed, and still it's as if the air itself has softened, like a long-forgotten song drifting away in silence. You reach for a thought, but all you find is stillness. And somewhere inside that stillness, a question rises, not with panic, not with noise, just gently, like a breath asking to be noticed. Is there still something left for me? Not in the way the world defines it, not another task to finish, not another role to perform, but something deeper, something softer, something alive, a feeling, a flicker, a sense that you haven't yet fully lived all the life that was meant for you. If you've ever felt that, if you've ever looked around your days and wondered if you've quietly drifted away from yourself, then this is your invitation to return. In this video, I want to share with you not advice, not commands, but 8 gentle truths, each one like a small lantern to help you find your way back to what matters. They come from stories, from silence, from wisdom that doesn't shout but whispers. These truths are not meant to fix you. You are not broken. They are here to remind you of what you've forgotten, of who you still are. So stay with me, not just for a moment, but through the quiet unfolding of this whole journey. Because what you'll discover by the end may not just be answers, but a soft kind of clarity, a tenderness you may not have felt in years. And if something in these words stirs even the smallest light inside you, I invite you to stay, to breathe, to listen, and maybe when the time is right to begin again. Let's walk together, gently now, into what remains of this beautiful, unfinished life. Truth 1. You're allowed to want something again. There comes a point in life, not all at once but gradually, like fog creeping in on a quiet morning, when you begin to sense a strange stillness forming inside you. Not peace, not contentment, but a kind of silent suspension, as if life has paused between breaths. You wake up, make your tea, sit by the window, the birds still sing, the world still moves, and yet, there's a feeling, soft but insistent, that something essential is missing. Not from the world, but from you. A question begins to form, not loud but persistent, like the tide whispering at the edges of a forgotten shore. Is there still something left for me? It's easy to dismiss this question, to tell yourself it's just a passing thought or that you're being ungrateful. After all, you've lived a life. You've given, you've worked. You've raised children, paid bills, cared for others when you were tired and aching. You've carried joy and sorrow alike without complaint. But this whisper, this quiet hunger that stirs within, is not a sign of selfishness. It is the soul gently knocking, asking to be remembered. Buddhist teachings tell us that everything changes, anicca, that nothing is permanent, not even the identities we wrap around ourselves. We are parents, partners, workers, helpers, but those roles are like clothes we wear for a time. The mistake many of us make is forgetting that beneath those garments, we remain a living, breathing, luminous being. And the longing that stirs in later life, it is the soul reminding us that we are more than who we were. That becoming never ends. I once met a woman named Caroline, a retired school teacher in her late 60s. For years after retirement, she kept herself busy with chores, volunteering, and family obligations. But in quiet moments, she'd feel a sadness she couldn't explain. I thought I was just missing work, she told me. But one day, I realized I was missing me. The version of me who used to paint at night when the world was asleep. The version who once dreamed of writing children's books. With trembling hands and fading eyesight, Caroline began painting again. She wasn't trying to be good. She wasn't trying to publish. She simply began. "It's not the same as it was," she said, smiling. "It's better. Because I don't do it to become someone. I do it to meet myself again." There's a profound lesson in this. The Buddha once said, "As long as breath remains, the path remains." You don't need to seek a new identity. You don't need to find a purpose that others will praise. You only need to listen to that faint inner call, the one that says, "I still want to create. I still want to feel wonder. I still want to touch something that is mine." In the Dhammapada, one of the Buddha's oldest teachings, there's a verse that says, "Better than 100 years lived without wisdom is one day lived with insight." This insight is available to us at any age. And often it is in the later years, when the noise fades and the pace slows, that wisdom finally has room to speak. But we must be willing to hear it. And hearing begins with allowing ourselves to want again. Wanting is not a flaw, it is a flame. A sign that something inside us still burns. Too many people confuse aging with fading, as if the two are synonymous. But fading happens when we stop tending the inner fire. When we stop giving ourselves permission to desire. Not out of need, not out of ambition, but out of sacred curiosity. There's a beautiful Buddhist story about a potter named Shin, who in his 70s returned to his childhood village. He had once been known for making the most elegant tea bowls, each one infused with a calm stillness that monks revered. But after the death of his wife, he stopped. Decades passed. His hands became stiff, his back bent. One day, sitting beside the temple garden, a young novice asked Master Shin, "Why don't you make bowls anymore?" The old potter looked down at his empty palms and said, "Because I forgot that longing is also a prayer." The next day he returned to the wheel. His bowls were imperfect, wobbly, asymmetrical, but they were full of life. They were full of him, and the monks treasured them more than the perfect ones from his youth. That story stays with me, because it reminds us, perfection is not the point. Presence is. Intention is. Honoring the quiet pull inside us is what keeps us connected to the mystery of being. So if you felt that pull, however small, toward the garden, the canvas, the piano, the open road, the foreign language, the poem that's been sitting half-formed in your mind for 20 years, please don't silence it. Don't tell yourself it's too late. Don't let the world's noise drown out the sacred echo within. What if that small flicker is the very thread that will lead you back to joy? What if tending it, just once a week, just for 10 minutes, wasn't a luxury but an act of devotion? In Zen practice, every act, no matter how small, can be a form of awakening if done with attention. Washing a bowl, folding a cloth, watering a plant. Why not painting a stroke, writing a sentence, singing a single note in the privacy of your kitchen? And what if you gave yourself permission not to succeed but to return to curiosity, return to movement, return to the version of you who existed before the world asked you to be so many things for so many people? Aging in the West is often framed as decline, but in Buddhism, aging is revered as a time of ripening, a time when the fruits of your life, every tear, every sacrifice, every moment of quiet grace, are ready to be harvested and shared with tenderness, not just with others but with yourself. You have not missed your chance. You are not too late. You are not finished. In fact, if you're reading this now, perhaps this is your beginning. So light a candle, open that dusty notebook, touch the piano keys even if your fingers tremble, hum that melody even if your voice cracks. Plant one seed. Walk into the quiet and listen. There's something waiting for you, not out there but within. And its voice is kind. And its hands are open. What would your life feel like if you believed that every desire to create, to move, to feel again was sacred? What might open inside you if you honored it even just a little? As the old saying goes, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And sometimes the teacher is not a monk or a book or a ritual. Sometimes it is your own longing. It has waited long enough. So what will you do, not someday, not next month, but today, to welcome it back? Perhaps in this gentle returning, you will remember something essential: that the most meaningful parts of life are not what we leave behind, but what we choose, at any age, to come back to. And maybe, just maybe, what you long for is not out of reach. Maybe it's been waiting for you to notice it again. Truth 2. Peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of attention. You don't always notice the moment you begin to disappear. It doesn't come like thunder. It comes softly, like a gentle tide washing pieces of you away while you're too busy folding towels or refilling someone else's coffee. It starts when you say yes even though your body aches, when you smile to keep the peace even as your spirit flinches, when you convince yourself that your silence is strength, your sacrifice is love, your exhaustion is noble. One day you catch your reflection in a window and realize you haven't looked yourself in the eyes in weeks, maybe months, maybe longer, not truly, not with the gaze of someone who belongs to herself. And when the quiet comes, when the house is finally still and the errands stop and no one is calling your name, you expect rest. But what you feel instead is absence, your own, not because anyone stole you, but because you gave yourself away, piece by piece, and forgot to keep a portion for your own heart. It's a strange thing, to be surrounded by people who love you, who need you, and yet still feel like a ghost in your own life. You cook meals, make appointments, give advice, smile in photos, but inside you're a house with the lights turned off, and no one notices, because you've been so good at making sure they never have to. But here's what the world doesn't tell you. That vanishing in service to others is not the same as love. That compassion without boundaries becomes depletion. That selflessness without presence becomes erasure. And maybe, just maybe, the most courageous thing you can do at this stage of life is not to give more, but to come home to yourself. The Buddha never asked us to abandon ourselves for others. He taught the middle way, not indulgence, not self-denial, balance. A life where generosity flows from wholeness, not from emptiness. A life where you do not disappear in your giving, but remain awake, rooted, real. Because what good is your love if it costs you your breath? What good is your care if it silences your truth? And the truth is, many people, especially women, reach their 60s or 70s and begin to feel something missing. They look around and wonder why the days feel hollow, why the silence feels heavier, why even joy seems distant. But it's not purpose they've lost, it's proximity to themselves. It's intimacy with their own soul. Time alone is not the same as time with yourself. One is isolation, the other is invitation, and the difference is presence. I once met a woman, quiet and graceful, who told me she lights a candle every evening just for herself. Not for prayer, not for memory, simply to remember that she exists, that she is still here. And something about that moved me to tears. Because that small flame is not just a habit, it is resistance. It is a declaration. That in a world where she's been everything to everyone, she refuses to forget her own name. And so I ask you, when was the last time you greeted yourself in silence, without judgment, without task? When was the last time you asked, what do I need today, not to accomplish, not to serve, but simply to feel alive? When was the last time you let yourself matter? This is not about abandoning your roles, your family, your duties. This is about returning to the space inside you that has waited patiently for years. The part that still dreams. The part that still listens to music when no one's home. The part that still remembers who you were before the world asked you to be so much. Because you are not too old to begin again. You are not too late to belong to yourself. And you are certainly not finished becoming. You are the seed and the soil. You are the root and the rain. You are the home you've been searching for. And it's time. Time to stop apologizing for needing space. Time to stop shrinking to fit someone else's story. Time to take up the full space of your soul again. To pour a cup of tea and sit with your own presence as if it were holy, because it is. The sacred was never out there. It was always you. And if you are wondering where to start, perhaps the answer is not in grand reinvention, but in small, intentional acts of remembrance. You do not need to rewrite your life. You only need to return to it. One breath at a time, one quiet choice at a time. There is a Buddhist story about a woman named Patichara. She lost her entire family, her husband, her children, her parents, in the span of a few days. Devastated, wandering naked and mad with grief, she came to the Buddha, and instead of offering her platitudes or solutions, he simply sat with her, present, still, compassionate. Over time, through the warmth of being seen and the practice of mindful awareness, she came back to herself. She became one of the most respected teachers among the early Buddhist nuns, not because her life became easy again, but because she remembered who she was underneath the sorrow. And so can you. You see, returning to yourself isn't selfish. It's sacred. It's an act of remembering that you, too, are part of this great web of life. You are not just a helper or a caregiver or a quiet shadow in someone else's day. You are a soul with depth, with voice, with light. And that light is still burning even if it flickers. Let yourself be curious again, not because you need to achieve something, not because you must prove your worth, but because curiosity is the thread that pulls you closer to the truth of who you are. Ask, what would I do today if no one needed anything from me? What small thing would bring me peace? Not someday, not after retirement, not once the house is clean, but now. Maybe it's music. Maybe it's walking barefoot on grass. Maybe it's reading poetry aloud or sketching a flower or dancing when no one is watching. These are not trivial things. These are sacred acts of restoration. The Buddha said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. So give it. Give it without guilt. Give it without waiting for someone to grant you permission. Give it because the life you save by showing up for yourself might be your own." I remember a man named Ellis in his late 70s. He had spent most of his adult life caring for his disabled brother. After his brother passed, Ellis didn't know who he was anymore. "I don't have a reason to get up," he told me one morning. "I don't know what to do with myself." We sat in silence, and then he said something I'll never forget. "Maybe," he whispered, "I was never taught how to want anything for myself." That afternoon, he bought a second-hand violin. He didn't know how to play it. He squeaked and scratched and fumbled. But every morning, he practiced for 10 minutes. He said it was the first thing in decades that felt like it belonged just to him. "It's not about music," he told me. "It's about finally letting myself be someone who matters, even when no one is watching." This is what return looks like. Not dramatic, not perfect, just human, just enough. A small space carved into the day that says, "I exist." And the miracle is, when you begin to reclaim even one part of yourself, everything else begins to soften. You listen more deeply. You love more freely. You forgive more gently. Because when you come home to yourself, you no longer need to be everything for everyone. You simply become someone who is fully here. And that presence, that authenticity, is more healing than any performance of perfection could ever be. There's a passage in the Zen tradition that says, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." It means that nothing outward has to change. The miracle is not in what you do, it's in how you show up to your life. So show up. To the morning light through the curtains, to the sound of birds arguing on the windowsill, to the ache in your knees and the warmth of your tea, to the hollow silence that becomes sacred when you no longer fear it, to the version of yourself you thought was lost but has only been waiting. There is no expiration date on becoming. There is no age limit to joy. And there is no such thing as being too late to return to the center of your own life. You are not behind. You are right on time. You do not need to be more. You only need to be here, right now. So light the candle, breathe. Close your eyes and say your own name with love. Let this be your practice. Let this be your prayer, not to anyone outside of you, but to the you who forgot how to listen, how to soften, how to want. She's still there. He's still there. And they are so glad you're finally home. Truth 3. Healing does always look like joy. Sometimes it looks like finally being honest about the pain. There is a moment in every life when silence no longer soothes but stings. Not because silence is cruel, but because it reveals what we've buried beneath the noise. Memories we didn't want to face, grief we never named, truths we whispered only in the dark. For years, we've worn a smile like armor. We've told the world, I'm fine, even when a part of us was slowly crumbling inside. Because that's what strength looked like, didn't it? Holding it all together, not complaining, not falling apart. But the Buddha never asked us to pretend. He didn't praise perfection. He praised awareness, honesty, presence. And sometimes presence means sitting with the pain, not as a failure, not as a punishment, but as a doorway. Because healing doesn't always look like joy. Sometimes healing looks like finally allowing yourself to say, I'm tired, I'm lonely, I'm still hurt by what happened years ago. Healing may look like tears on your pillow at night, the ones you never let anyone see. It may sound like your voice cracking when you speak a truth you've swallowed for too long. It may feel like trembling hands writing a letter to someone who will never reply. But you write it anyway, because you need to let it go. There is deep dignity in facing your sorrow. There is sacred strength in not running from your own wounds. You see, pain that is not acknowledged becomes armor, and that armor hardens around the heart until we no longer feel anything at all, until even joy begins to feel distant, unreachable. But pain that is witnessed with compassion, without judgment, without shame, can begin to transform. It can begin to breathe again. In Buddhist teachings, there's the story of Kisigatami, a mother who lost her only child and went mad with grief. She went from house to house, begging someone to give her medicine to bring her baby back to life. No one could help her until she came to the Buddha. He told her, "Bring me a mustard seed from a home that has never known sorrow, and I will help you." She searched every village, every hut, but in every home she found loss, illness, death. Heartache. Slowly she realized, sorrow is not unique to her. It is part of the human condition. And with that realization, her healing began. We suffer most when we believe we are suffering alone. But you are not alone. Every person you pass on the street has carried something unspeakable. Every smiling face has a story you cannot see. And in knowing that, we soften. We remember that pain is not something to hide. It is something to hold, with tenderness, with courage, with breath. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is cry. Sometimes the most awakened act is to finally speak the truth you've been afraid to name. Sometimes healing begins not with fixing, but with feeling. So if you are holding something heavy, an old betrayal, an ache that never quite healed, a loneliness you've dressed up as independence, I invite you to sit with it, not to fix it, not to judge it, just to witness it. Say to yourself, yes, this happened, yes, it hurt, and yes, I am still here. In the great silence of being still with your truth, something remarkable begins to happen. The pain doesn't vanish, but it begins to feel less like a wound and more like a scar, something that reminds you not of weakness, but of survival, of resilience, of the vastness of your heart. There's a kind of beauty that only arises after we've been broken. It's softer, truer, less interested in appearances, more grounded in presence. Aging isn't just about letting go of youth, it's about reclaiming truth. And truth is the soil in which real peace can grow. So if today your healing doesn't feel joyful, if it feels messy or raw or quiet or uncertain, know that you are not failing. You are arriving. And in your honesty, you are becoming free. Truth 4. You don't have to be who you used to be. You're allowed to become someone new. Somewhere along the path of growing older, a quiet pressure begins to form. It comes not from others, but from within, a voice that whispers, "You used to be strong. You used to be needed. You used to be someone." And while no one may say it aloud, you feel it when old friends drift away, when your name is no longer called as often, when your pace slows and the world seems to race ahead without you. And suddenly, you find yourself trying to live up to a version of yourself that no longer fits. You try to wear the clothes of your past, old roles, old expectations, old stories, but they don't feel right anymore. They don't fit who you are now, and yet it's so hard to let them go. Because who are you if not the one who always held it together, the one who always said yes, the one who used to be admired, depended on, praised? But here is a gentle truth. You don't have to keep being who you were. You are not a statue carved in stone. You are a living, breathing, changing soul. And your worth was never in the things you did for others. It was always in your presence, your kindness, your essence. The Buddha taught that clinging causes suffering. And one of the hardest things to stop clinging to is our own identity. We hold tight to who we used to be, afraid that if we let go, we will vanish. That if we're no longer useful, we'll no longer be lovable. But love is not earned through usefulness. Love, true love, is what remains when all roles fall away. And becoming someone new is not betrayal. It's growth. It's grace. It's listening to the quiet truth of who you are now, not who you were then. I once sat with a woman named Ruth. She had spent her whole life as a nurse, a mother, a caretaker for everyone around her. When her husband passed and her children moved far away, she told me, "I don't know who I am without someone to care for." She felt lost, unmoored, but over time she began gardening, not for productivity, not for others, just for herself. She found joy in the smallest things, the color of tomatoes, the smell of basil, the miracle of watching something grow in silence. She said, "I thought I was just a nurse, but now I think I'm also a student of beauty. I watch things grow, and in doing that I think I'm growing too." This is what transformation looks like, not loud, not flashy, just quiet permission to evolve. You are not obligated to stay the same. You're allowed to change your mind, to leave behind what no longer brings you peace, to outgrow your old dreams and discover new ones, to stop chasing what once mattered and now feels empty. There is a Japanese practice called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The cracks are not hidden. They are highlighted, honored, because the story of the break becomes part of the beauty. You too are allowed to carry your cracks with grace. You are not broken, you are becoming. And the new you, the one rising from stillness, from softness, from truth, is not a lesser version. It is a deeper version. So when the voice inside tries to shame you for being slower or softer or more uncertain than you used to be, speak back to it gently. I am not who I was, and that's okay. I'm becoming who I am. You don't owe the world your past self. You owe yourself the freedom to evolve. And maybe, just maybe, this version of you, the one that listens more, feels more, forgives more, breathes more, is closer to the truth than you've ever been. Because sometimes becoming isn't about rising higher. It's about sinking deeper into your own presence, into your own life, into your own heart. Truth 5. The quiet things you do still matter, even if no one notices. There comes a moment in life, not loud, not tragic, but softly disorienting, when you begin to wonder if the things you do still mean anything. You make the bed, you water the plants, you clean the same dishes, fold the same shirts, open the same window to the same breeze. And while the world outside races toward goals and praise, you're left inside with a question that arrives uninvited but doesn't leave easily. Do I still matter if no one is watching? It's not vanity, it's not ego, it's the quiet ache of being human. Because once upon a time, your hands were needed constantly. You were the one who made the meals, fixed the problems, held the family together like the spine of a book. Now the house is quieter. Your name is called less often, and the applause you once never needed now feels painfully absent. But here's the truth, the kind that lives in deeper places than applause can reach. What you do in silence still carries weight. The small, unnoticed acts you perform, those matter. Not because others see them, but because they shape the soul of your life. In the Buddhist tradition, it's not the grand gestures that define a person's path. It's the intention behind the smallest act, boiling a kettle with presence, arranging a flower with care, sweeping the floor as if sweeping away the dust from the mind itself. These moments aren't filler. They're the essence, the practice, the prayer. There's an old saying in Zen, when no one is looking, how you sweep the floor reveals your true devotion. And you've been sweeping for years. You've shown up when it was hard, smiled when it wasn't returned, given your energy, your love, your time without fanfare, without asking for a single thank you. And now, in the stillness of your later years, you question whether your existence still carries meaning if the world doesn't reflect it back to you. But the truth is, your meaning was never defined by others' eyes. It's in the way you still notice the way sunlight touches the floor. It's in the way you talk softly to the cat. It's in the care you take folding towels, placing them gently as if they hold history. These are the things that shape the energy of a home. These are the quiet acts that nourish the unseen world. I once knew a man named Walter. He lived alone after his wife passed. No visitors, no children. He wasn't well known. But every morning he made breakfast for two. He poured her coffee, buttered her toast, and set her seat across the table, just the way she liked it. And then, in silence, he would sit and talk to her, as if love didn't end when the world stopped noticing it. He told me once, it's not about pretending, it's about remembering. It's about keeping the tenderness alive even when there's no one left to see it. That is not delusion, that is devotion, and you. Maybe you've kept tending a garden no one visits. Maybe you write thoughts in a notebook no one reads. Maybe you hum a tune in the kitchen with no one there to clap. But I need you to know, those moments are not empty. They are sacred. They are your soul's way of saying, I'm still here. I still care. I still love this life, even when it forgets to love me back. In Buddhist thought, this is dana, the act of giving without attachment, not giving to be seen, not giving to be thanked, but giving because giving itself is an act of presence. So if your days feel invisible, remember this. You are not invisible to what matters most. Every breath you take with awareness is a ripple of peace in a rushing world. Every small gesture of kindness, even in solitude, is a bell that rings somewhere far beyond what the eye can see. You don't need a stage to carry meaning. You don't need an audience to be valuable. Because sometimes, the most sacred things happen where no spotlight ever shines. And if all you do today is choose gentleness in a moment when bitterness would be easier, you've shifted the world, just a little. And that is enough. Truth 6. You are not too broken to begin again. Somewhere along the way, perhaps quietly, perhaps through something loud and life-shattering, you came to believe that certain doors were now closed forever. Maybe it was after the divorce. Maybe it was when someone you loved stopped calling. Maybe it was the diagnosis, the loss, the betrayal, or the slow, aching erosion of who you once were. And though you kept going, because life asked you to, you stopped hoping in the same way. Not because you're weak, not because you gave up, but because disappointment over time teaches the heart to flinch. And so here you are now, a little quieter, a little more cautious, wondering silently, is it too late for me? Am I too broken to begin again? But here's the truth no one may have ever told you. Nothing in this world is too broken to be part of the sacred. Not a clay pot, not a cracked voice, not a weary soul, not even a shattered heart. In Japanese culture, there is an art form called kintsugi, where broken pottery is not discarded but repaired with gold. The cracks aren't hidden, they're illuminated. The philosophy is simple but profound. Something that has been broken and healed becomes more beautiful because of its history. The Buddha knew this too. He taught not that we must avoid suffering, but that we must understand it deeply, because in understanding it, we find liberation. In every brokenness lies the seed of compassion. In every tear shed, the chance to soften instead of harden. You don't have to erase your past to be worthy of your future. You don't have to undo your mistakes to be allowed another beginning. You don't even have to be fully healed to be deeply whole. Starting again doesn't mean becoming someone new. It means remembering who you were before the world taught you to be afraid. It means picking up the pieces, not to be perfect, but to honor the fact that you're still here, still breathing, still able to feel the sun on your skin and the pull of longing in your chest. I once met a woman who lost her son in a tragic accident. For years, she carried her grief like a second skin. She laughed when expected, showed up when needed, but inside she felt hollow. Until one day, she told me, I realized I didn't have to stop grieving to start living again. I could carry my sorrow and still plant flowers. I could cry and still cook dinner with music playing. I could be both broken and blooming. Those words stayed with me, because isn't that what we all need to believe? That we don't have to choose between mourning and moving forward. That we can hold loss in one hand and possibility in the other. That healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means weaving the pain into the story without letting it be the final chapter. In Buddhist teachings, this is the heart of resilience. Not toughness, not numbness, but the gentle courage to touch our suffering with awareness and still open our hearts to life. You are not too far gone. You are not too old. You are not too damaged to rediscover wonder or love or a part of yourself that's been waiting quietly in the wings. And beginning again doesn't require a grand gesture. It might look like stepping outside barefoot and feeling the grass again. It might look like sitting still for 10 minutes without judging your thoughts. It might look like writing a letter you'll never send, or cooking a new recipe, or calling a friend you've been too hurt to speak to. Whatever it is, let it be small but true. Let it be humble but yours. There is a Zen story of a monk who swept the same path every day for 30 years. When asked why, he said, "Because every morning the world changes, and so must I." That is beginning again. Not forgetting, not forcing, but simply showing up, willing to see the same world with new eyes. So, if no one else has told you this today, let me be the one. It's not too late. You're not too broken. You are allowed to start over. Not because you failed, but because life is made of constant becoming. And who you are today is enough to begin. Truth 7. You are allowed to outgrow the people you once thought you'd never live without. There's a kind of grief no one prepares you for, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't arrive with slammed doors or final goodbyes, but drifts in slowly, like autumn wind through an open window. One day you're sitting across from someone you once loved deeply, maybe a friend, a partner, a sibling, and everything looks the same, but nothing feels the same. Their laugh doesn't reach you like it used to. The silence between you stretches just a little longer. You find yourself shrinking in their presence, holding back your truth, your joy, your growth, because somewhere deep down you've changed, and they haven't come with you. At first you try to explain it away. Maybe you're tired, maybe they're stressed, maybe it's just a phase. But no, there's a deeper knowing rising in you, a truth that gently, persistently whispers, "You've outgrown this." And immediately, the guilt arrives. Because no one talks about this part of growing, how it can feel like betrayal when your soul begins to shift. How leaving behind a version of your life can feel like leaving behind a part of yourself. We're told to be loyal, to be forgiving, to hold on. But sometimes, the bravest thing you'll ever do is honor what no longer fits, even if it once felt like home. In Buddhist thought, everything is impermanent, anicca. Even the bonds we thought were eternal. The truth is, people enter our lives for reasons we may never fully understand. Some stay for a season, some walk with us for years, and some we carry in our hearts long after the road has divided. But the point is not how long they stayed. The point is whether we allowed ourselves to grow while they were with us, and whether we have the courage to keep growing when it's time to let go. I once met a man in his 70s who had been best friends with a man since they were 12. They fished together, married around the same time, raised kids on the same block. But after retirement, something shifted. "He talks to me like I never changed," the man said. "Like I'm still the boy who laughed at the same old jokes, but I've lived a whole lifetime. I've lost people. I've learned things. I want to talk about meaning." He still wants to talk about football. There was no fight, no falling out, just a gentle truth. We're no longer walking the same path, and that too is okay. You are allowed to move forward without making someone else the villain. You are allowed to love someone and still leave the version of yourself that only exists around them. You are allowed to seek conversations that feed your spirit, not just your nostalgia. Because here's the truth no one told you when you were younger. Closeness is not measured by history. It's measured by presence. And if being with someone requires you to hide the person you are becoming, that is not presence. That is performance. The Buddha spoke of right association, keeping company with those who support our awakening. Not those who agree with us or flatter us, but those who make room for our truth, who welcome our becoming. So if there is someone in your life who once felt like your mirror, but now feels like your mask, it's not cruel to release them. It's honest. And honesty is a form of love too. You do not have to make yourself smaller to fit into relationships that were built for a smaller version of you. You are allowed to walk away from conversations that feel like echo chambers of who you used to be. You are allowed to choose depth over comfort, alignment over familiarity, truth over approval. And no, you don't need everyone to understand you're leaving. That is the sacred loneliness of growth. It's the part where you walk ahead not because you don't care, but because you finally do, about your wholeness, your voice, your light. Let them remember you kindly. Let them misunderstand you if they must. Let them go on believing you are who you were, while you continue becoming who you are. Because outgrowing is not arrogance. It is the soul stretching toward the sun. And you, dear heart, were never meant to stay buried in what you've outlived. You were made to rise. Truth 8. Peace isn't found in the absence of chaos, but in the presence of compassion. We all wait for the moment when the noise stops, when the drama settles, when the bills are paid, when the body doesn't ache, when the phone finally stops ringing. We tell ourselves, I'll find peace when life calms down, when people behave, when the world makes sense again. But what if peace doesn't wait for stillness? What if it lives somewhere else entirely, not outside us but within? Because here's the truth that quietly dawns on us as we grow older, softer, and more awake. Life rarely quiets down. The world doesn't stop spinning because we crave silence. People don't suddenly become kind just because we've grown tired of being hurt. Bodies age, children forget to call, mornings bring new aches, and the news never seems to pause its storm. And yet, despite it all, despite the mess, the noise, the uncertainty, peace is still possible. Not because everything is perfect, but because you've stopped demanding it to be. In the Buddhist tradition, there's a beautiful teaching called upekkha, equanimity. It doesn't mean indifference. It means calm in the midst of all things. A calm not born from control but from surrender. A heart that can open even when it's been broken. A mind that can watch the storm and say, yes, I see you, but I will not lose myself in you. And that's what real peace is. It's not waiting for the world to become easy. It's becoming gentle with yourself in the middle of the hard parts. You see, peace doesn't arrive when you finally fix everything. It arrives when you stop waging war on what is. When you stop fighting your age. When you stop arguing with time. When you stop carrying everyone's pain like a badge of honor. When you stop needing to explain your worth to people who never saw it. When you sit down with your back against the quiet of the afternoon and say, even this, even now is enough. I remember a woman named Ruth, 84, soft eyes, voice like a lullaby. Her husband had died a decade ago. Her daughter had moved across the country. Her knees hurt. Her days were simple, tea, gardening, books. And yet every time I visited her, there was a lightness about her. Not because she had fewer problems, but because she carried them differently. I asked her once how she stayed so calm, and she smiled and said, I stopped waiting for my life to get easier. I just started making it quieter inside me. That line stayed with me. And over the years, I've come to understand what she meant. You don't need perfect conditions to rest. You don't need everyone to understand you to feel whole. You don't need to reach some enlightened state to stop hurting. You only need this compassion for your mistakes, for your limitations, for the things you still carry and the things you still grieve. Buddha never promised a pain-free life. He promised a path through suffering. And that path begins not in fixing, but in seeing. Seeing the wound and holding it kindly. Seeing the fear and not turning away. Seeing the past and choosing gently not to live there. So maybe peace isn't a place you arrive. Maybe it's a practice, a returning, a decision to begin again every morning, to breathe a little slower, to judge a little less, to forgive the version of you who didn't know better and thank the version of you who still keeps showing up, to find beauty in the ordinary, the click of your teacup, the sunlight on your blanket, the song of birds who sing whether or not you're listening. This is what the elders knew, what the monks in the hills whisper when no one is watching. That peace isn't the absence of suffering. It's the presence of love even while you suffer. It's holding your heart like you would hold a crying child, not trying to silence it but saying, I'm here. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere. And perhaps that's what you've been searching for all along. Not a quieter world, but a softer place within yourself. So tonight, light a candle not for the chaos to end, but for your courage to continue. Wrap a blanket not just around your shoulders, but around the parts of you that still feel tired, still feel afraid, still feel unworthy. And when the noise rises again tomorrow, as it surely will, may you meet it not with resistance but with gentleness. Because peace is what happens when the world changes. Peace is what you become when you do. You've just spent time with 8 quiet truths, 8 gentle threads woven not to fix your life, but to help you feel it again. And now, as we come to the end, I want to ask you something not with urgency, but with tenderness. What did you feel? Not what you agreed with or what sounded nice, but what truly echoed in your bones. Because somewhere as you listened, something likely stirred. A memory, a sorrow, a flicker of warmth, a thought you haven't had in years. Maybe you didn't even notice it at first, but now that we've arrived here, something in you has shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but truthfully. That's the quiet work of coming home to yourself. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It's the way your breath slows when you hear something true. It's the way your shoulders drop when you finally feel seen. And perhaps more than anything, it's the moment you realize you were never truly lost, just waiting to be remembered. You see, aging isn't a slow erasure. It's a sacred unveiling, the peeling back of all that you've performed so you can return to what is real. Not the roles you carried, but the being who carried them. Not the titles you earned, but the soul who wore them. And maybe now you're ready to meet yourself again, not as an obligation, but as a gift. Maybe you're ready to sit with the life you've lived, not with regret, but with reverence. Maybe you're ready to stop rushing toward answers and start listening for presence. Maybe you're ready to let go of the idea that you must still prove something in order to be loved. You don't. Your breath is enough. Your presence is enough. You are enough. Not because you're perfect, but because you're still here. And that means life is still flowing through you, still wanting something with you, not just from you. So if this message met you in a quiet hour in the space between chores or in the hush of a long evening, know that it wasn't by accident. Life has a way of bringing us what we're ready for when we finally become still enough to notice. And if you feel that stillness now, if something in you whispered, "Yes, I needed this," then stay close. Because we're just beginning. This isn't a goodbye. It's a soft invitation to begin again, with more kindness, more softness, and less hurry. If this message touched you, I invite you to subscribe, not for the sake of numbers, but to keep this door open. To let these gentle truths keep reaching you. To be reminded again and again that your story matters, that your quiet matters, that your becoming isn't over. We'll be here week after week, holding space for the parts of you that the world forgot to honor. You are not alone in this, and perhaps that's the greatest truth of all.